All right, right on. Thanks. Thank you. My legs are shaking. I'm old and I've got to do different kinds of exercises now. And I was doing these lunges today. Dude, I'm dying. Like, I don't like being up here and I've got quaky legs. I'm thinking to myself, am I nervous? No, I'm old. My legs are killing me. I used to run because I was healthy, and I would run, and it was great, and I loved it, but running is really hard on you when you live in Buffalo because there's roughly 11 months where you can't outside. It's just you can't. You can run in July, and then the rest of the time you're either breaking your ankles on potholes or you're running in freezing temperatures and snow. So I got a treadmill. I thought it was a really good idea, and I bought a treadmill when we first moved here because I was running and it was great, and then the weather changed, and I was like, I'm not doing this. I am not doing this. I'm from Georgia, and I moved here from Florida, and this is not right. So I'm coming inside, I'm going to my basement. At the time, our basement wasn't finished. I set up a treadmill facing an exposed wall, like it's unfinished, just facing a wall, no TV, no magazines, just me and white, stuff on an unfinished wall. Now, I would run, and the reason I did this, I was trying to strengthen myself mentally. It was kind of my mental jujitsu. I was like, I'm gonna literally listen to nothing. I'm not watching TV. I'm gonna stare at this wall, and I'm gonna run until the cows come home, and I'm gonna be tough in the head, man. Because I knew, man, as a pastor, you gotta have it right there. I don't know, I'm just making that up. But I realized, I want to develop some mental toughness. Maybe I'll do some races or whatever. So I would just stare at that wall and I would run. No magazines, no TV, no music, no nothing, just me and my mental toughness. Now, you would think, listening to me, you're like, dude, that would drive me insane. That wasn't the part that drove me insane. The part that drove me insane is that I would crank that bad boy up. I'd be pushing it up. It'd be up to 1.5 or 2 or something on the speed, whatever. I would crank it up, and I would run for 4 miles, maybe 5. And I am sweating like a church member at offering time kind of sweating, right? And I'm hauling on this thing, and when I'm done, after 4 miles, I haven't gone anywhere. I'm in the exact same place I was when I started, and now my heart rate's up, I'm sweating, and I haven't done anything. If you want to have a conversation, hey man, what'd you see on your run? This wall. That's all I saw. I didn't go anywhere. That's what started to play with my mind. I literally ran for 4 or 5 miles and I went absolutely nowhere. I was in the same place I was when I started. It's like walking into your garage and sitting in your car for 5 hours and telling people you've been on a road trip. It's idiotic. It's nuts, right? So that's what I began to struggle with kind of in my head. But the truth is that spiritually, I get in that space sometimes. There are occasions in my life where I realize that I've gone long periods of time and my spiritual scenery hasn't changed at all. I've been working, I've been running, I've been sweating, there's a lot going on. My heart rate's up, but I haven't moved. I'm in the same place I was. I don't know if you've ever felt that way. Maybe you feel like that way right now. Some of you have been through final exams and all that. Some of you are in the midst of final exams, or you're looking forward to them or not looking forward to them, whatever your perspective is on that. But you're thinking to yourself, man, I don't know. If you just asked yourself, same time 1 year ago, has my spiritual scenery really changed? I'm not talking about you moved or any of that. I'm talking about the way that you view the world, the way that you see God, the way that all of that, has that changed for you? Or does it look just like it did? You see, when our spiritual scenery doesn't change, what happens is that we can become frustrated really quick. Or, worse than that, we can become bored. And that's when we start getting into a dangerous place spiritually, because now we're either frustrated and we do things as a result of that frustration, or we're bored, and that's not a great place for us to be either. Because what it brings us to is this: it brings us to a place of self-reliance. And that's the same place we were on when we were just on the treadmill going nowhere. And so it begins to work in this crazy circle, and we end up not getting anywhere at all. You see, at the end of the day, life with Jesus can be summed up this way: it's about following. Life with Jesus is about following him. That's ultimately what we see when we begin to read about what that looks like. And here's the thing that you need to know about following, is it requires trust. To be able to follow well, you're going to have to trust the one that you're following. See, in the scripture itself, two words ring out in the ministry of Jesus over and over and over again. Two words, and here they are: follow me. In fact, when you begin to open up the Gospels, the earliest gospel that was written was probably Mark. I don't know that for absolute sure, but likely it was Mark. And some of the first words that you hear in the earliest gospel written is you hear Jesus saying, "Follow me." And then when you get to the last gospel written, the Gospel of John, and you start turning back to the very end of John in chapter 21, one of the last commands that you hear coming out of the mouth of Jesus: follow me. So from the earliest time in the Gospels to the very end of the Gospels, it is bookended by these two words that to this day still echo off of the water of the Sea of Galilee where Jesus was saying them. Follow me. I've stood on the edge of that water probably 8 times in Israel at the Sea of Galilee. And it's almost as if I can hear, when the wind picks up and the waves begin to come in, I can just hear the words of Jesus. Follow me. This is what we see in the Gospels, but for us to follow, it requires something. You see, following as a word actually has an implication. It implies something. Movement. Advance. You got to go somewhere, right? You cannot follow by standing still. It was a lot of years ago. Both of my sons are here, and they're old now because I'm old. They're your age. You're old. They were really young. I think Tanner, my younger son, was 3 at the time, which would have made Trace older. I don't even know how old he is. I think he's my kid. So Tanner, I think, was 3, and we went to this corn maze. You guys ever done those, like here in Western New York? Like in the fall, that's a super fun thing to do. And plus, when you got little kids or whatever, or if you're a college student, or if you just like it, and we drove out there. It's in the middle of nowhere. I still, to this date, don't know where we were. My wife's giving me directions. You try to put it in the GPS just went, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know where you're going. And we went to this place out in the middle of nowhere. I'm just seeing fields and fields and fields, and finally we pull in, and there's this corn maze in the middle of this like apple festival that's happening. It's like apple pie, apple cider, apple pomegranates, apple, whatever. And I'm like, okay, enough of that. I like apple pie, but that was, it was into everything. So we got to this corn maze, and they were like, let's go in this. And the kids were like, yeah, let's do it. So we went, and 5 seconds into this thing, Trace and Tanner, they just took off running. I'm like, what? You're just going to take off running in a corn maze? You're like little kids. I'm a dad. I'm responsible for you. So I start to jog, trying to find them. Oh, no, not finding them at all. This corn maze was a freak show. Like, I was expecting people to come out, like, with swords and whatnot. Like, it was, have you ever seen Children of the Corn back in the day? Yeah. If you're old like me, all of your leaders that are older are going, oh, we saw that movie. These freaky psycho kids came out with knives out of the cornfields. That's what I thought was happening around every turn. And so, and the corn was super tall. Like, I'm 6'1", and I couldn't see over the corn. Like, I don't know, it was like 8 feet tall or whatever it was. I don't know if they gave it steroids, like a steroid cornfield. So we're running through this thing. I can't find them anywhere. I'm yelling. I've left my wife. I'm trying to find my kids. Now, all of a sudden, I find myself alone in a corn maze that is apparently roughly the size of the state of New York. I was thinking, I need a scooter or an Uber, something. I'm never getting out of here. So I stopped at this one place. There was an opening, and I just stopped. I was tired. I was running around, and I'm yelling, Trace, Tanner, nothing. Edie, nothing. Mommy, nothing. I can't even conjure up my mom, right? She lives in Georgia. She couldn't hear me. So when I finally just stopped, and I'm like, what am I doing? I'm just standing there by myself, middle of a corn maze, grown adult man, pastor of a church, standing in the middle of a corn maze. Am I praying? No, complaining. Not praying, just complaining. What is going on? What is the deal? This is ridiculous. I didn't know what to do. Then these two boys came running around the corner. I don't know how old they were. They were small. They were just little people. They came running around the corner, and they were like, they stopped, and they were like, Mister, how do you get out of here? So I looked at them, and in my mind, like I'm thinking, these boys are dependent on me. I felt like I was like a sergeant, in the Marine Corps or something. I'm like, last chopper out of Vietnam, boys, we're getting out of here. I looked at them. I looked at these little dudes, and I said, boys, it's a scary corn maze. They were just looking at me like, and I said, here's what I know about corn mazes. You cannot get out of them. It's not how I finished. You cut me off with a laugh. You cannot get out of them standing still. And they went. I said, let's go. And we took off. I didn't even know where I was going. I'm just leading little kids that aren't even my own, and I'm just running around corner stuff. We finally got out of the corn maze. It was like, I don't know how long it was, but like my sons were shaving when I got out. That's how old they were. My wife was cashing Social Security checks by the time I got out. Literally, when we got out, they were eating pie and stuff, and I'm like, what is going on? And they're like, we got out real fast. I'm like, So I saved these two boys' lives. See these little kids? I saved their lives. You should hang around me more. I saved some children. Here's my lesson. You can't get out of a corn maze by standing still. And I can tell you this. You cannot follow Jesus by standing still. You see, to follow him means it implies that you are headed somewhere, that you are moving somewhere, that Jesus is on the road leading, and we are tucking ourselves up behind him and going wherever he goes. That's the implication of following. Here's the thing. Once you start following, the scenery starts to change. And as the scenery starts to change, you need to learn how to trust the one that you're following. Right? You get off the treadmill, you're not in the same place you were, everything begins to change. Look at Peter's life, for example. Peter the apostle, you remember him, right? He's the one who was always fired up about everything. He was kind of the man's man. He was like the alpha of the disciples, right? He's the alpha guy. And every time he said something, the other guys were like, okay, yeah, well, I guess we can do that. Peter was kind of loud. Sometimes he was loud to the point of saying stupid stuff, right? Peter was willing to take steps of faith, right? He got out of a boat, walked on water for a little bit before he freaked out. I would have freaked out too. It's not a shot at Peter. In fact, when I see him on the other side, glad we'll be there and he won't beat me up because he probably could. He was a great guy. Loved Jesus, told him, man, I'll go with you anywhere. I'll follow you anywhere. I'll follow you to the death. And Jesus was like, no, you won't. Because before you hear this chicken start, you're going to say you don't even know me. Never. I never do that. Sure enough, that's exactly what happens, right? Except right before that, when Jesus is in the garden praying and these soldiers come for him, Peter's ready to take on the whole Roman Empire. He starts wielding a sword. He cuts a dude's ear off. Like he was serious about this thing. He cuts a guy's ear off. Now Jesus picks it up and puts it back on. Awesome, right? Awesome. Yep. Just put it back on. And then told Peter, hey, put your sword up. Stick his ear back on, like Mr. Potato Head, like just sticks it back on. It's unbelievable. Like if I was standing there, I'd just be like, what is going on? This is incredible. Peter's pumped, but then Jesus says, take it easy. Jesus goes to the cross. Peter says, I don't even know him. He starts cussing, saying, I don't even know him. That's what when you read the original text, he's actually cursing. And he's saying, I don't know him. I do not know him. I don't know what you're talking about. He doesn't show up at the cross. And then all of a sudden, 3 days later, he hears about Jesus having gotten up from the dead. He's like, what? He runs, he sees there's nobody there, but he hasn't seen him yet. Then they're all together in a room, and the doors are locked because they're fearing people coming after them. The doors are locked, and Jesus just walks in. Not knocked, not they opened the door. He just walked in because he had died, and now he'd resurrected from the dead, and he had a new body, a glorified body. Sign me up for one of those, by the way. A glorified body. And he just walks into the room through the door or the wall or whatever, right? Peter's like, what? They're all freaked out. Then they don't see him for a little while. Peter decides, you know what, I'm going to go back to fishing. It's all he knew to do, right? He just goes back to fishing, and all the other guys said, okay, I'll go with you. And so there they are, fishing on the Sea of Galilee. They're out there doing their thing. They see Jesus on the shore. They weren't sure it was him. Jesus yells out, he's like, hey, you caught any fish? And they're like, nah. That's how Peter always answered, nah. I'm like, dude, get another job. You're always fishing and never catching anything, right? Cast your net to the other side, and they do, and then they're like, what, that's Jesus. Peter jumps out, like rips his clothes off, jumps out, swims to shore, starts talking to Jesus. Jesus restores him, and then they have this conversation where Jesus is saying, Peter, do you love me? And he says it 3 times. For every time that Peter had denied that he knew Jesus, Jesus asked him if he loved him. And then he would say, feed my sheep, right? Then he goes on to say this. This is in John chapter 21, beginning of verse 18. Jesus said, very truly, I tell you, Peter, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted, but when you're old, you'll stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him, follow me. Did you imagine that? Jesus, who started out by saying to Peter, when he was calling him, said, follow me. Peter says, I'll follow you. I still want you to follow me. I'll follow you anywhere. I'll follow you to the death. And he didn't quite do that. And now Jesus gets with him and he says, I'm going to restore you, Peter. But I want you to know something. And then he gives him a description of the kind of death he's going to die, stretching out his arms. It was a death of crucifixion that Peter was going to face, and he ultimately did in Rome face crucifixion upside down. And then he said, after telling Peter how he's going to die, he said, follow me. He just said to Peter, follow me to your death. That's what he said to Peter. Follow me. Following is serious business. Can you imagine how Peter's spiritual scenery was changing in that second? When Jesus is saying to him, follow me, even to your death. His spiritual scenery is starting to change dramatically, and you would think that Peter had already learned this lesson that to follow means you've got to trust. You would think that he already had that like knocked down, right? Because of what had happened in his life. In fact, if we went backwards in time from this moment after the resurrection on the Sea of Galilee, and we went back to another time on the Sea of Galilee, early on in the ministry of Jesus, when he's just now kind of getting to know Peter, something interesting happened. It's in Luke chapter number 5, and here's what it says. One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, that's the Sea of Galilee, it's the same place, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. And he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, and the one belonging to Simon, that's another name for Peter, his name was Simon Peter, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. That's a common refrain from Peter. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. I'll trust you. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. That's a lot of fish. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people. So they pulled their boats up on the shore, and they left everything, and they followed him. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that Jesus was a carpenter by trade and Peter was a fisherman by trade, and Jesus is the one giving Peter directions on how to fish. In fact, after teaching, he says, Peter, I want you to take your boat out into the deep. And Peter's like, Master, we've been fishing all night. We haven't caught anything. But because you told us to do it, we'll do it. Now, one of the things that I learned when I was at the Sea of Galilee is in the kind of ancient world, they used to actually fish before the sun came up and in the shallower areas because the fish would all come there, right? And so they would be able to kind of cast their nets there and take in a big haul. Jesus is actually telling him to do the exact opposite thing. He's saying, I don't want you to stay here in the shallow water, and I don't want you to wait until the sun goes down or is about to come up. That's usually when they did it early in the morning. He said, I want you to launch out into the deep. Why do you think Jesus was doing that? I think he was actually teaching Peter something here. Not only that Jesus had the power to do what he was about to do, but I think he was trying to teach Peter about trust. Following requires trust. And do you know where you learn trust? Listen, only in the deep water. That's where you learn how to do it. You don't learn trust in the shallow water. You learn it in the deep water. Now, this is pretty obvious, isn't it? You go to a pool. I find it interesting that people say, even when they're standing around in the shallow end, if you ask them what they're doing, they would tell you they're swimming. They're standing in 3 feet of water. I'm confident everyone in here can stand in for 3 feet of water, right? You just sit there, stand there, get on your knees there if you want to. That's not swimming. That's standing, right? You're not really swimming at that point. I wish we'd rename it because people say it all the time. Hey, well, what are you doing? Swimming? No, you're not. In the shallow end. You're liquid lounging, right? This is like hydro relaxation. We could call it that. We could call it, aquatic nothingness. Whatever we wanted to call it, just let's not call it swimming. Because that's not what it is. It's just shallow end. I learned this pretty quickly when my oldest son, when he was just a little guy, and we took him to swimming lessons. When he was in the shallow end, he was going crazy. He was loving life, right? Splashing his friends, splashing some on his face. Everything's cool, making bubbles, mostly with his mouth. You get all of that, right? You're in the shallow end. You're just having fun, doing your thing. But then, the whistle blows. Lifeguard lady says, everybody out, walk down to the deep end. It just got real. Like all the kids that just a minute ago were splashing and having fun. She went, everybody to the deep end. They all went. And they get out, and you just hear like music start behind them. No. They're just wide-eyed and scared out of their minds. And then they got to go to this little diving board, and then the lifeguard's in there, and she says, okay, I want you to jump, and you just got to jump to me. And they're all debating in their heads. You can see it, right? They're like 5 or however old they are. They're learning how to swim, 4, 3, whatever they are. 1, I don't know. When do you teach kids to swim? I have no idea. I didn't even go to the lessons. Mostly, I didn't. Just this one. He jumps in. She catches him. He goes under, and she's like, swim to the side. She kind of shoves him like this, and he's, it's one of those, right? She looks like an otter. Doesn't quite know how to do it, but it's just like game on, right? And then he gets out, and it's just like your blood's pumping. He realized in that moment, without being able to articulate it, this is living. Like the shallow end thing, I can just stand there and splash, and we can make bubbles, but that's like whatever. Here, in the deep water, this is when it's living. This is when it gets real. I wonder how many of us in our lives spiritually think that we're living in the deep water of trust, but are actually just spending all of our time in the shallow end of self-reliance. We've got our thing, man. We've got our friends. We like hanging out in the warm water. We'll splash each other's faces every now and then. We can talk without going under. get a little sun while we're there. Everything's cool. But here's the thing in the shallow end, you don't need Jesus. You can just stand there yourself. You don't need him. Where you need him is the deep water. I think that's one of the things that Jesus was helping to teach Peter. And I think it can help to teach us. Because sometimes you can evaluate whether or not you're just staying in the shallow end. For instance, we in our minds kind of agree with the fact and think to ourselves that we, like Peter, would say, Jesus, I'll follow you anywhere. I'll do whatever you want. But when the rubber hits the road and crisis comes or trouble comes or persecution comes or hardship comes or your friends kind of look at you like you're crazy, then sometimes we just bail. We just bail. Or in our minds we say, you know what? We know that every single person needs Jesus. He is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. I know this to be true in my own life. And we say that, but we're unwilling to even converse about that with anybody in our world. We may still be just standing around in the shallow end, splashing each other, having fun when we come to a gathering, and singing our lungs out with the people that we hang out with in the shallow end. But maybe we're not really stepping into the deep water of faith and saying, wherever you go, I'll go, because following requires that we move, right? And when the spiritual scenery begins to change, it requires our trust. And trust is only learned in the deep water. See, Peter was at a critical time. He said, okay, I'll do it, Jesus, because you told me to. We didn't catch anything, but I'll do it. And he goes out there. He catches so many fish that he has to get other boats to help him. And now they've got so many fish that the boats are sinking. And this is all on Peter. Like Peter is the captain. I am the captain here, right? Peter is the captain. He's got this whole thing. Could you imagine? What I'm shocked by is Peter's response. He sees all of this. Jesus is in the boat. He sees all of this happen. This is unbelievable. The boats are almost sinking. You would think Peter would be like dancing. This is the best catch I've ever had in my life. Like, my name is going to be in the Jerusalem Post. They are going to put me up in the Sea of Galilee Yacht Club. There's my picture with all my fish, right? He was living in it. But instead what he does is he falls down to his knees. And he says to Jesus, depart from me. I'm a sinful man. Now here's the thing. When we read that not carefully, the first thing that comes to our mind is, man, this is just Peter, being holy, like being awesome. I don't know. And I'll tell you why I don't know. If you think, man, he's just so astonished at the catch of fish, he had to be, right? But why fall down and say, depart from me, I'm a sinful man? You see, just before that, when you're reading in Luke's gospel, there's something that happened just before this event that I think is awesomer than what just happened. Here's what it says, Luke chapter 4. It says, Jesus left the synagogue and went to the house of Simon, and Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. So he bent over her, and he rebuked the fever, and it left her. Awesome. She got up at once and began to wait on them. And at sunset, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands on each one, he healed them. This is happening at Peter's house. Like Peter's house is inundated with people who are like sick and everything. Jesus is just going, I'm healing you, and I'm healing you, and I'm healing you, and I'm healing you, and your mom's fever's gone. I mean, it's incredible. Moreover, demons started coming out of many people shouting, you are the Son of God. How would you like to be at the house? You're just at the house hanging out with Peter. Jesus is dealing with all this, and demons are flying out of people yelling, you are the Son of God. And that's just Tuesday. But Jesus rebuked them and would not allow them to speak. So they're like, you are the Son of God. Jesus goes, shut your pie hole. They're done. Because they knew he was the Messiah. If there's any time that Peter should fall on his knees and say, Lord, depart from me. I'm a sinful man. I'm astonished at who you are. I would think, if it's up to me, big catch of fish, or Jesus controlling the entire demonic world, that's not even comparable to me. I'm like, Jesus controlling the whole demonic world. I am on my face just saying, Lord, depart from me. I am a sinful man. But Peter didn't do that there. He did it in the boat when he caught all those fish. Do you know why I think that may be the case? Because Peter, when Jesus was going to call him to follow him, Peter wasn't struggling with whether to stay or to leave his business. He was struggling with controlling or trusting. You see, think about it. Peter just took in the biggest haul he's ever had, maybe the biggest haul in the history of the Sea of Galilee, for all I know. Probably was. I mean, he could have upgraded his boat. He could have taken his family on a Disney vacation, right? He had an egg now, man, like this was big time. And I think Peter was wrestling with this idea of do I hang on to this and stay with this because now, man, I can get a bigger boat, I can hire some more employees, I'm going to be really well known, I'm going to be comfortable, or do I trust him? The one who did this, do I trust him? You see, there's a critical time, men and women, there's a critical time when we're all called to the deep water, all of us. And that critical time is like a crisis of our faith. You see, we get called out into the deep water with Jesus, and he asks us to walk out there, and he asks us to trust him by faith. And all of a sudden, we get out into the deep water from the shallow end, and now we start swimming, but eventually we realize it's not us, we're being held up. Do you know what that is? Listen, that's a crisis. You're going, dude, that's not a crisis. That's what I long for. That's what I want to see happen in my life. Oh, me too. But let me tell you what the crisis is that once you finish with that, Jesus is going to ask you to do it again and again and again. What's the name of that water park that's in Erie? Splash Lagoon. We went there when we were, when my guys were much younger and kind of we did the family thing and we went to Splash Lagoon. There's this killer ride there. Most of them are just little kid rides, but there's one, it's called Hurricane Hole. Anybody been down Hurricane Hole? It's sweet. So Hurricane Hole, for those of you who've never been down it, it sounds just like that. You're going, Hurricane Hole, that just doesn't sound cool. It is. So you go through all this stuff, right? You basically go down this slide into this toilet bowl. I mean, it's just this big old huge bowl, and you're just spinning around, and then it just drops you through this hole. And I did it the first time. I didn't know what was coming, and I just did it, and I fly down this slide, and then I'm in this deal, and I'm so disoriented, It drops me down this hole. I come up. I have no idea where I am. I'm freaked out. I get out of it, and I'm just walking like this, in circles. Guys are like, you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And so I go get my wife. She was just sunning herself in the indoor water park, and the lights. And so I went and got her. I said, hey, come do this ride. She's like, what ride? And I said, this one over here. She said, what's it about? I said, just do it. So she does it. And I'm waiting for her, and she comes up. She's super disoriented. And she gets out, and she's all like, and I was like, that was killer, wasn't it? She's like, that was awesome. I said, let's do it again. She said, never again. Not doing that again. No, I'm not doing that. Isn't that how we do it? This is how we do it with Jesus sometimes. This is what it looks like for us. He calls us out into the deep water. We step out in faith and we do it. And we realize, man, I'm not drowning. How is that possible? I'm not strong enough to swim in this current. How is this even possible? And you realize it's Jesus holding you up. And then when that's all said and done, you're like, that was incredible. That was awesome. And Jesus says, do it again. And you're like, I'm not doing that again. That is scary, man. That's frightening. That freaks me out. That's why when we follow, we have to trust. Peter, he falls down because he's dealing with this issue of whether or not he's going to trust. Let me flash forward, because ultimately, in John chapter 21, we see the fullness of this conversation. This is after the resurrection. This is where we started. And I want you to see the whole conversation and what Peter said. He said to Peter, "Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself, you went where you wanted, but when you're old, you'll stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who's going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" And Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." Peter was testing Jesus here a little bit, and here's what he was testing him in. He didn't want to be alone. He didn't want to be the only one that had to trust Jesus and walk into the deep water. Jesus told him, "Follow me to your death." And then he repeated it. "Hey, follow me." Peter tests him. He says, "What? John's following us right now. What about him? Shouldn't he have to die too?" That's basically what he's saying. I mean, you can hear Peter's logic, right? What about John? This dude's a knucklehead sometimes. Let's be honest. Remember when we were in the boat in the Sea of Galilee, Jesus, and the waves started coming, there's a big storm, right? And then you come walking out on the water, and everybody's like, "It's a ghost." And I'm like, "No, that's Jesus." And then you said, "Get out of the boat." And I got out of the boat, and I walked. Where was John? Sucking his thumb in the back of the boat. You remember in the Garden of Gethsemane? When it was all going down? They were coming for you. Where was I? I was going ballistic with my sword on dude's ears. Where was John? Running like a girl to his mama. If I've got to die following you, surely John's got to pay some price. And Jesus says, "Peter, what I do with him is my business. If I want him to live until I come back, that's my business." And then he says to Peter, "You follow me." You. Write this down. Trust is personal. Trust is personal. See, young men and women, you are going to have times in your life in following Jesus where the road is crowded. Those are fun times. You've got a bunch of people around you who are serious about following Jesus, and you're walking with them, and you're going down the road following Jesus together. It is a fun time. But listen carefully. There are going to be other times in your life where the road is empty. Because Jesus says, "I want you to come with me." Well, what about them? I want you to come with me. What about all? I want you to follow me. Trust is personal. Listen, sometimes what we want is we want a personal relationship with Jesus, but we want a corporate trust. Jesus says, listen, the responsibility of a personal relationship is personal trust. That when I tell you we're going to move, that we're going this direction, then that's what we're going to do. So let me ask you a question. Is Jesus worthy of your trust no matter what? That's the lesson that we learn here. But I want to remind you of this. Your answer to that question will tell you whether or not you're a disciple or you're a treadmill runner. Is Jesus worthy of your trust no matter what? Let's bow our heads together. You guys have been so gracious to listen here for these few moments. I just want to pray for you. Father, I thank you for the grace that you've shown to us in giving us the examples in your word and for teaching us what it looks like to follow hard after you. I pray that even now these students, these college-age young men and women, would let these lessons sink in deeply in their hearts even now, because these are the lessons that we all have to learn as we follow after you, Jesus. So I pray you'd write this on their heart, and I ask you to do it in Jesus' name.
Just continuing in a spirit of prayer. Pastor Jerry's talking about following Jesus. In order to follow Jesus, you have to make that decision to trust him and take that step. And so maybe you're sitting here tonight and like you have yet to make that decision in your life where you say, Jesus, I want to follow you. Jesus, I trust you enough to give you my life. Man, I'd love to help you with that tonight. And so if that's you, that can start with a simple prayer, and I can help you with some words. It's not even about specifically getting the right words in the right order. It's more about the posture of your heart and saying, Jesus, I trust you, and so I'm going to follow you. So maybe if that's you tonight, you'd repeat this prayer after me. You don't even have to say it out loud because God can hear your thoughts. Say this, Dear God, I want to place my faith and trust in Jesus. God, no matter what that looks like with my life, I want to follow. When it's tough, when it's easy. When it feels like others are doing it, when it might feel like I'm the only one doing it. Heads bowed, eyes closed, no one looking around. That was you tonight. You say, Jay, I made a decision to follow Jesus. Would you be so brave? You're in a safe place, but would you be so brave and courageous to raise your hand and look right at me? I want to remember you in a closing prayer, and I've got information that I want to get in your hands that will only help you in this. I see your hand. If you just keep your hand up and keep looking at me, I see your hand. Anyone else? Just scanning across your mind. I don't want to miss anyone. Those of us who have our hands raised, would you just keep your hands up, and I'm going to pray for you. Father, I see hands, you see hearts. And so I pray right now that you would be so real as you draw people to yourself, that they would know that they're following a real Jesus. If your hands are raised, if you just look at me one more time. I've got leaders who have information. They're going to get it in your hands. They're just going to explain it to you real quick. We're about to sing a song. So the best place to do it is right there out in the cafe. You're not going at any hidden place. You're not signing up for anything. We're just getting something in your hand that will help you out. God, for the rest of us, would we be a people that trusts you? God, help us to be a people that have such a deep and strong faith. Jesus, that we would trust you in everything, with everything.
Thanks for watching this episode of Vintage. If God spoke to you through this talk, please click on the button titled, How Do I Follow Jesus on our website, and feel free to contact us and let us know what God is doing in your life. Thanks again for watching.